Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Chakra Wave Meditation Podcast. Again, I bring you another fascinating guest. I'm really genuinely excited about this guest. I have literally no questions written down, no notes, because I feel like this is going to flow really easily. Today, I'm talking to Kathleen Adams. Now, Kathleen, okay, is a psychotherapist, but she's also the founder of the Center for Journal Therapy, which I mean, I think speaks for itself, journal therapy. So thanks so much for joining me today, Kay. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
I think we're going to learn a lot. I spend a lot of time telling people about the power of journaling.
Mhm.
I know that it works. I have done it myself. I probably don't do it as regularly as I should, but I know that whenever I'm in a pickle, the first thing I do is I go to my either my journaling app on my laptop or to a notebook and I scribble it all out because I'd rather all that stuff was out of me than swirling around in my head. But I feel like we're going to get the science from UK. So tell me how did your journey with journaling begin? Where did this start in your life?
It started when I was 10 years old, and my favorite aunt gave me one of those little tiny 5-year diaries that has, 4 lines for every day.
I had one of those. Yes.
Yeah, you have a little lock and key.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was 10 and not very much interesting happened to me in the course of a day.
I know.
So I was really excited to get the journal because I had known from the time I was very small that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. Um, so this was like my inauguration into being a writer. And I didn't have anything to write about. So I used to make up stories about things that happened at school that didn't really happen, or, just stuff that I fictionalized.
I love
And
that.
I got
I used to just
really
write down.
nervous.
I just used to write down what I'd had for my supper, and it was
Yeah,
like
yeah, I
really
did that.
mundane when I was
I,
that. It's exactly
I
the
did that
same.
for
Eh?
I did that for a while and it was just so boring.
Yeah, I know.
So I made it interesting and
Good. Love
I
that.
didn't know enough to call it fiction in those days. Um, but I was consumed with guilt because I didn't know whether people were going to, snoop in my diary, which I knew could happen because I had snooped in my older sister's diary. She's
Mm.
since forgiven me. But so I didn't know whether people would read it and think that it was true when it wasn't, or if they would read it and know that I was lying.
Mm.
So to resolve that conflict, I would just tear out that page, which meant that that page and the next 4 years of that date were gone.
Mm.
So it was a little stop start, and I had a little bit of a rough start. But when I got into middle school, I discovered spiral notebooks. And that loosened me up a lot when I wasn't limited. By that time, something interesting often was happening, but I also um, had more than 4 lines. I wanted more than 4 lines to write it in. So after, a while of just writing the whole page in my 5-year diary, I gave up on that and just started using spiral notebooks. So that was my kind of inelegant start. But I've used it just like you've used it. I use it for sorting myself out, for problem solving, for, you know, kvetching, for every time I'm mad. Not every time, but when I'm mad, I just write things that I would never say out loud to
Mm.
somebody. I can be socially inappropriate in my journal. And it became a, a, a tool and a resource and a friend through my entire college career, 20s, into my 30s, which is when I started teaching journal writing. It was when I was
Right.
34.
Wow. And so when did you become a psychotherapist?
The same fall that I started graduate school in psychotherapy in 1985 was the same month that I started teaching my first journal writing class. So I was in a 3-year program. I graduated when in 1988, and I have been a therapist since 1988 and a
Wow.
journal therapist for just about all that time.
So when somebody comes to you and I'm going to see my therapist, just straightforward, I'm going to see my therapist. Do you always recommend that they people do journaling? Is that part of it's just part of what you do and recommend, I presume?
It is part of what I do, and most clients, I normally have like a 20, 30-minute intake call with a client before we start. And I ask them as one of my questions, do you now or have you ever written a journal? And they say yes or no. And I tell them that this is one of my areas of expertise and might they be willing to learn more about using a journal in treatment? And they either say yes, maybe, or no. So
Mm,
I kind of go with what the client wants. I'm not forcing it on anybody, but if they are kind of reluctant to get started at first, there comes a point at which enough trust and therapeutic rapport, as we call it, has been established that I can reintroduce it. And I often just invite people to write for 5 minutes during
mm,
a session.
yeah.
Just like,
Interesting.
let's pause there. It looks like you're on the edge of something kind of important. Let's jump in and write for 5 minutes and see what comes out. And then I give them a specific prompt that will hopefully engage them in the query that we are in. So about 75, 80% of my clients do end up working with journals with me. Um, as as my practice grew, more and more people came to me because I specialized in journal therapy, and
And the
that was
Center for Journal
easy.
Therapy, what is that? It sounds like a building, but I'm presuming it's just a
This is the global headquarters of the Center for Journal Therapy, all 80 square feet of my little office at home.
Yeah,
The Center for Journal Therapy was founded right after I graduated because I knew that that's what I wanted to have be my focus. And um, we provide education and training in various aspects of writing for healing, growth, and
yeah,
change. We have uh, one of our most popular programs is the instructor certification training for the Journal to the Self workshop, which is what I started out with on my living room floor in 1985 with 6 friends who wanted to learn how to write journals. And I said, just get a notebook. It's not hard. And they said, not hard for you, hard for us. We, um, so I put together a little workshop that was based on a whole bunch of different writing techniques that I had used across the years. I was a journalist before I was a therapist,
mm,
and I had used a lot of the writing devices that I used in my journalistic career, um, along with some creative writing devices that I adapted from creative writing to journal writing. And there were 21 of them in the early days. And this course was very fast paced and taught 21 different ways to write. And um, later, as I developed, after I'd worked with clients enough to notice enough dynamics that I could create some theory around it, I realized that I had kind of intuitively, um, without really knowing what I was doing or why I was doing it, I had given myself a toolbox of techniques that actually made sense therapeutically. So there's techniques that, you know, if you want to engage your right brain, if you want to engage your left brain, if you want to um, envision your future, if you want to process your past, there's just different ways to write that I call techniques that will help people move into where the outcome that they want and choose a technique that will support that outcome.
wonderful. Okay. I love this. I have so many questions, but I want to, so in my work, when I'm working with a client, I always give my clients a whole load sheets of prompts. When we're working through the chakra system, when I'm wanting them to uncover, because I'm very much, as I'm sure you are, well, you do, that a proponent of the fact that you can't be healed, you have to heal yourself. This finding this strength within to uncover what is there. Journaling is such an extraordinary tool to do that. And so the prompts that I give them, I send them off to do these exercises, which then allows them to uncover what's going on, say in their root chakra or their sacral chakra. So very sort of directed questions. So it's interesting because what you're saying is very much what I do. Like it's very intuitively kind of led. But what I want to get back to is something actually we were just chatted about very briefly before I hit record, which was the kind of the history, like the science behind
Mhm.
journaling and why it works. So, I want to get back to a few techniques and like really what, but I'm always a fan of going back to the science to prove why this works, because then it's irrefutable and there's nobody going to go, "Oh, that's just a load of tosh." So you talked about there was a couple of people who had developed this, or I mean, people must have been doing this for millennia, though, right? I mean,
Oh, yes, yes.
historians find people's diaries from years gone by,
Hmm.
which are
Hmm.
so informative. That's, not just about social history, but internal as well.
Yes, and I'm not up on the dates, exact dates for this because this is like going way back in the time machine for my recall. But the earliest known diaries were from the Japanese Heian court, I think in like the 10th century or something like that,
Wow.
where Japanese geishas would write what they called pillow books, which were just little diaries that they would tuck under their pillow and about life in the court and their responsibilities as a geisha, and I'm sure who they were mad at and who they had a crush on, and just
Just all the
kind
normal
of
things that
normal
you write about.
stares.
Yeah.
But it's been going on for literally millennia. And
Wonder what it is about the human condition that feels the urge to write down what the internal world is saying.
I think we all want to know ourselves at depth. Well, many of us do, not everybody.
Yeah.
But I think people are attracted to the idea that they can comfort themselves or nurture themselves or grow themselves through capturing their thoughts and feelings in a way that feels private and accessible and portable.
Yes.
Um, it was either Plato or Socrates that said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I think that was Socrates, actually.
Yeah.
And so, it's about examining our lives.
Mm.
The two people that I rely on as mentors and leaders and role models in my field are the late, great Dr. Ira Progoff, who I think was the first journal therapist. He probably would not have called himself that. He died in, I think, 1998. I think. But he founded a methodology called the Intensive Journal Workshop that he was a analytic psychoanalyst, analytic psychologist in Manhattan in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Um, but he was in his postgraduate studies. He studied with Carl Jung at the Jung Institute in Zurich for I think three different postgraduate fellowships. And he became very, very immersed in the Jungian method of depth psychology and um, archetypes and guided visualization. And he incorporated a lot of those concepts into a workshop that he called the intensive journal method, and it is very intensive. I took it for the first time in 1982 when I was coming out of a major life trauma that had happened very recently, and I didn't feel ready. I'd registered for this workshop, which was offered through my church. At the first minute I heard about it, because I had read his books and knew his methods, but they're complex and abstract and hard to decipher without
Mm.
guidance. Um, so I called my minister after this tragedy befell me and said, I'm just a mess. I can't, traumatized. I can't do this. And he said, I think this is where you need to be. So I said, okay. Um, and it was the best thing that I ever did. It was absolutely the most healing thing. Now, it didn't heal me from a major trauma, but it gave me hope,
It
which I
certainly
was
helped you.
desperately lacking.
Certainly helped you.
And it was it was just amazing. And so that was my first experience with actual theory and practice besides my own work. Um, and I practiced that method for the 3 years between when I um, learned it and when I started graduate school.
So give me an example of what that looks like, because for all us kind of normos who just buy a spiral book, a nice pretty book, and just write what we're feeling down in it, and sometimes we get a prompt that we go for. When you're saying like it was really intensive, is it because of the number of prompts and the amount of journaling that was required? Like what was it that was I mean, this guy clearly very learned and had done a lot of work in this whole therapy field. So this must have been very like the 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 quality of the question, the choice of
Exactly.
words must have been very, very specific. So give me a few examples or ideas of
Yes.
what that
Yes.
consists of.
It was the depth that we went to. It was bypassing the everyday normal stuff, which I'm a big fan of everyday normal journaling. That's
Mm,
like what most of us do. And my method is way different from Progoff's method.
mm,
But the method that I learned from him that was so healing for me was not just writing about what happened, but taking it to a really deep level. So, as an example, Progoff's probably the technique that he is the most well known for is the dialogue technique. And the dialogue is a written conversation where you write both parts. Um, so first you write me and you write your question, and then you write your dialogue partner. And there's six in Progoff's work, there's six different types of dialogues. There's dialogue with persons, which can be living, dead, fictional, non-fictional, somebody you want to meet, somebody you want to forget, somebody you're having a conflict with. So the dialogue with person, you just assume the voice of someone else, and
okay.
and
Yeah.
the way that he structures it, it's almost like it reveals the unconscious process. Rogoff's work is designed to reveal the unconscious fears, griefs, choices, happinesses
Yeah.
that bubble up when you are writing at depth.
Okay.
Another type of dialogue is with work, your job, your career, your avocation, the volunteer work that gives your life meaning and purpose. Another one is a dialogue with the body, your
Uh-huh.
health, your broken toe. I
Yeah, I do
dialogued with
that.
my
I do.
tailbone one time.
Yeah.
I I had slipped on a chunk of ice and fell smack on a rock on my tailbone, and I bruised it really badly, and it just hurt so much that I had a dialogue with my tailbone, and I said, "What's going on?" And and I found that sitting was very challenging. It just hurt to sit down. So I said, "Tailbone, what's going on?" And my tailbone immediately said, "Your life would be a lot more interesting if you would just get off your butt." And I went, "What?" And I immediately leapt to my feet. I was so surprised.
Oh my God.
And I said,
Yeah.
"What?" And I then had pursued, I mean, like I'm writing, standing up,
Yeah.
scribbling on my page, but it really gave me insight into something that I really was not at the conscious level.
Yeah. No, this is lovely because I often I give this exercise as well in my work with to my clients where I say I want you to have a dialogue with your body, so as if you're speaking from your hips. So you write or you say, "Hi, I'm hips and I feel
Uh-huh.
cranky," or I feel like, and then go, okay, so why are we feeling cranky? Why are we feeling cranky hips? And like have this dialogue. I also love to talk to my chakras. So I like to,
Yes,
at least at the very least go, I'm listening. I love you. I'm so grateful, whatever is
exactly.
required.
I
Yeah.
was just going to say you could dialogue with your chakras.
Yeah.
You could say, ground chakra, what do I need to know today?
Yeah.
Or heart chakra, why are you hurting? Why am
Yeah.
I feeling sad?
Yeah.
It's a wonderful, wonderful device, and it doesn't have to go to the depth that Progoff offers
Yeah.
because it's really deep.
Yeah.
But that was really my initiation into a methodology. The other pioneer in this field, and one of the other, the top three theorists these days are Progoff, Pennebaker, and I am considered the third top theorist because my method is way different from either of their methods,
Mm.
but it is a method that, I remember I took several of the Progoff workshops in the 3 years between my first one and my own workshop.
Mm.
And I remember thinking, this is so wonderful and so deep, but the only way that I mean, I often didn't go there because it was so intense and it was so
Mm.
time consuming. And
Yeah.
so I remember coming back from one of the trips that was, up the road 60 miles, uh, and thinking to myself, I wish there were a journal methodology for real people who have real lives and don't have the immersion
Yeah.
problem that I have. And then I made up one, a methodology for real
Right.
people with real
Yeah.
lives.
Wonderful, which
Dr.
is perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
James Pennebaker is the research psychologist who gives us most of our evidence based research in the field. And his methodology is sort of like at the other extreme from Rogoff's. His methodology is it originated as a 4-part rite that has since, over the years, many researchers have truncated it down to a 3-part rite. But the original methodology was 4 rites in a particular sequence. The first one was, and the his earliest research was on trauma. And so he would have people write about the most traumatic event of their or stressful event of their lives, and they have a hard time talking about it with other people. And in many cases, they had never spoken about it out loud. They kept it internalized.
Yeah.
So the first rite was tell the story, just tell the
Mhm.
story, like what happened.
Mhm.
The second rite, which is the next day, is um, add in, tell the story again, but add in details. Like if the first day is the photograph of what happened, the second day is,
Movie.
bring the camera down and look what's going on outside the frame of the photograph. What are the
Mm.
details? What was the environmental context? What do you, like just
The
more of the
smells, the
story.
tastes, the temperatures, the details. Yeah.
Yes. And what you don't usually remember about this. The third day is about making meaning. It's like, what have you moved toward or away from as a result of this experience? How has it impacted you? Um, and the fourth day is kind of a synthesis of having written about this for 3 days. Is there anything you can release? Is there any place you want to go? Do you feel more capable of leaning into something in a way that you didn't 3 days ago? And what they found was, and this was all with college students in the early days, what they found was that there was immediate immune system reaction to this. People had more antibodies. They they, over the course of 6 weeks after the study, they developed more T cells or they
Wow.
increased T cell functioning.
Yeah.
And, and, and that was at a 6 week follow up. They were considerably healthier than they were at the beginning of the 4 day rite. On a 6 month follow up from the campus health center, where almost all of the students went for their medical care, they found that the students in the test group had a significant decrease in the visits that they made to the health center for stress related illnesses or problems compared to the control group who also wrote for 4 consecutive days, but they wrote about non-traumatic things. They wrote about you know
Holidays or something.
they had a choice of things that they could write about, but none of
Mm.
them, they were designed to be benign.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that
Wow.
was the first studies. And since then, he has done a ton more work. And his methodology has been adapted and adopted by researchers all over the world. And now they have done studies on every disease you can think of, a lot of cancer studies, a lot. I mean, it's fertility, infertility, fibromyalgia. Um, oh gosh, there's just so many. Uh,
Wow.
one study was with um, arthritis sufferers and another kind of disease like arthritis. I can't remember what it is right now, but they had they asked the physicians to rate the symptom severity of this group of patients that were doing the study,
Mhm.
and the physicians rated symptom reduction for people who had written in 47% of their patients who were in the study. 47% of them had significant symptom reduction at some future point after the study. And one of the reviewers, this was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the reviewers said if similar outcome evidence had been offered for a new drug, it would likely be in widespread use within a short time.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow. I mean, I love that because I had no idea that it had been tested to that kind of level. I mean, it's such a common wide help. You can go into any bookshop, gift shop, and you can buy your own little journal. Like journaling's a thing. But the fact that it's been scientifically, I had no idea.
yeah,
This is so fascinating. So how does you so you've developed, so you are the kind of third wave, if you like, of this
yeah,
journal therapy, and you have your own methodology, which is
yes.
sounds like it's much more sensible in that it's much more user friendly, but I'm sure that it has similar results. You've taken everything that you've learned from all of these other things, and I would imagine. So tell me a little bit about the techniques that you use within your teaching.
Yeah, the toolbox of techniques started out at 21, but that was just too many to jam into a course. So kind of it sifted down to about 18. And they include things like something so simple as sentence stems, like, today I want, or right now I feel, or the most important thing to do. And then you just finish the sentence. And if you want to continue, you continue. And if you don't want to continue, it just stands there on your page as an intention, as a goal, as an acknowledgement. Um, so sentence stems can be just very, very simple. I didn't make up sentence stems, for heaven's sakes. I don't think anybody made up sentence stems, but it's a journal device that helps people start. And it can be as short as one word. Finish the sentence with one word, one sentence, one paragraph, whatever you want. And I think the theoretical model that I am going to be most known for over time, I mean, after I'm dead, is this concept of what I call the journal ladder, which is a structure, it looks like a ladder. Um, I was working with trauma patients in a psychiatric hospital. I was hired as a journal therapist about 3 or 4 years after graduate school. I was working in a regular psychiatric hospital as a group therapist. And then I got this call from a psychiatrist at a trauma institute asking if I would come be their journal therapist along with their art therapist and their other expressive arts therapies, which was like unheard of. I was so excited to be invited. So I moved over across town and did intake interviews with the, the patients that were coming onto the unit, all of whom had traumatic stress disorders. And they almost all wrote journals and they were fiercely attached to them. And I asked a question in my assessment, my intake assessment, about do you ever experience obstacles, blocks, or barriers such that you feel worse instead of better after you write and it doesn't resolve in a short time? And that question was based in Pennebaker's research that says it's normal, if you're writing about something upsetting, it's normal to feel upset. And it should resolve fairly quickly, eat dinner, have a good night's sleep, and wake up in the morning and you feel better.
Yeah.
94% of them said they did experience obstacles, blocks, or barriers that made them feel worse instead of better, and it didn't resolve.
Oh,
And I
wow.
said, well, wow, what are you doing? How are you, what do you think that's about? I asked them to describe to me what was happening, like when you get upset and it doesn't get resolved, how do you overcome? I mean, like, what are you doing? What are you
Yeah.
doing in your journal? Almost without exception, they were trying to write themselves through their trauma, and they re-traumatized themselves by writing about trauma without enough structure. So I said, like, how are you writing? They're like, what do you mean, how am I writing? I'm picking up my pen and my notebook. They were describing free writing or stream of consciousness writing, which is where most people start if they don't have a different idea. It's
Yeah.
just like open your page, hit the page, write until you're done writing, and then close the book.
Yeah.
Well, they were writing themselves off a cliff.
So they were writing about the traumas that they were trying to get rid of and re-traumatizing
Yes,
themselves by
yes,
reliving it. So
yes.
they were keeping that wound open and open and open.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. So I thought, whoa, this is weird, but understandable in context. I mean, free writing engages the unconscious mind, it engages the subconscious mind. It brings up stuff that, I mean, not always, but sometimes it does. I mean, that's one of the properties of free writing is
Yeah.
that it will surface material. So I thought, well, if free writing is the most unstructured, unpaced, uncontained technique there is, what is the most structured, paced, and contained technique? And I looked at my entire inventory of techniques, 18 of them, and more actually, because I made some up when I was working clinically in the other psych hospital. Um, and it was sentence stems, you know, that's the closest thing you can do. The next level up from that is a timed write, and I call it the 5 minute sprint. Just pick a topic, write for 5 minutes, set the timer on your phone, blast it, stop when the timer goes off, finish your sentence, and you're done. And write fast. That's the sprint part.
Hmm.
And then it just goes up and up and up, and it ends um, with free writing. And what
Mm.
I found was that the 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 journal ladder kind of naturally broke itself into three sections. The first section, I didn't realize this until I started using it a little bit, were, quick, fast, concrete, information driven. I mean, you get information from these. And so they're really great for anybody who's in a hurry, anybody who doesn't really like to write, but they're willing to do it a little bit,
Mm.
people who tend to be rational and data based, engineers, scientists, um, CEOs are all attracted to this set of techniques. The middle rungs are about insight orientation and a little bit of creativity. And those have things like one of the poetic devices. captured moments, which is like little vignettes of juicy moments in your life or tragic moments if you choose, but I like to invite people to write juicy ones. So, a captured moment of beauty.
Yeah.
I was walking the dog this morning and it was sunrise and the clouds were painted 15 different colors. And in my head, I wrote a captured moment about that.
Yeah.
Um, the upper techniques are abstract and intuitive, and they are the ones that go deeper and do access information. They all access information
Mm.
from different levels of the mind, but the lower rungs tend to be uh, the everyday mind.
Yeah.
Middle rungs tend to be subconscious, and upper rungs tend to be acting more in the more likely to surface unconscious material. So that's a therapeutic methodology that I've taught to thousands of therapists, all of whom report that it is a game changer in their practices because they now know how to help a client write in ways that make sense to them.
Yeah. I love that. I think I'm really enjoying this phrase that you've introduced me to. I mean, I know what a sentence stem is from what you've described, but it's so beautiful because at the end of this stem is this flower that you bring to it, and I love that. I think it's such a beautiful image. So, like, there are so many. You mentioned earlier on that you had a whole lot of techniques that could access right brain, left brain, past, future. Like when we're wanting to access our energy body, our energetic body, when we want to kind of delve a little bit more into the spiritual and um have you other ways? I mean, because I know that when I'm teaching, I mean, it certainly differs from which chakra I'm talking about. So if I'm teaching the root chakra, I'll ask questions like, who was your, how was your childhood care? What sort of, I'll ask questions about your family and what sort of, there's rooted foundational things. But when I get up to the chakra, I'll ask about values and belief systems and like spirituality. So I mean, I guess already I'm sort of intuitively kind of aiming off at these various different things, which I absolutely love. But I'm interested in the left brain, right brain thing because obviously they're very different. You'll be able to give me a much better description. But for me, like, the right side represents masculine, yang, solar energy. Right side is feminine, yin, lunar energy. And so, this imbalance that we frequently have when our body's left to right often tells us a lot about that side of us. So I'm interested to get back, rewind back to your sort of more scientific side of things, this left brain, right brain, accessing that through journaling. Go. I'm interested. What can you tell me?
Okay. So the left brained techniques correspond most logically with the lower rungs of the ladder. And those are the ones that are designed to elicit, and any of these can function in any number of ways. Um, and you can bring any ladder technique that's high on the ladder down just by like structuring it a little bit differently or putting
Yeah,
a time limit on it or something
yeah,
like that.
with you.
But when you're talking about uh, the root chakra and talking about your origins, your history, your base, your
Mhm.
roots. Um, Lists are great. You know, 10 things I know about my grandparents or my ancestors. Um, 5 ways that I could feel more rooted or more grounded. Um, Lists are wonderful. They're fast, they're succinct, and they can give us just a lot of information. Um, Another technique that is on the lower rungs of the ladder is a technique that we call clustering. It's also known as mind mapping, where you associate a central theme like um, first chakra or root chakra and circle it.
Mhm.
And then you just spin thoughts off of other thoughts, everything you associate with it, and then step back from it. Gabriel Lucerico, who is no longer with us, I'm sorry to say, wrote a book called Writing the Natural Way. And it's all about the clustering technique. She calls it clustering. Other people call it mind mapping.
Yeah.
And she says that, you cluster until you feel some sort of a felt sense shift internally. Like for me, it's always like when I'm riding my bike and I'm changing gears, and there's this moment before the chain engages, and then the chain engages, and it's like, oh, I'm in gear again. And
Yeah.
it's like this feeling. And
Uh-huh.
that's how I am when I'm listening for that internal place of shift.
Yes.
And she says that represents the integration of left and right brain. And that's the time to step back from your cluster, look at it, and then write a synthesis in which you put all the pieces together. And that's probably about a 15-minute writing process from start to finish. The cluster, 10 to 15 minutes, the cluster can be done in probably an average of 5 minutes. She says 3 to 7 minutes, watch
Yeah.
for the shift. But that helps people organize um, and recall, I mean, synthesize things that seem disparate, but then come together in the end, which is still on the lower end of the ladder because the circles and lines provide the structure and the pacing is pretty quick, but you can get an awful lot of benefit from that. On
Yeah.
the other end, the intuitive abstract techniques are marvelous for exploring the depth dimension. Um, we have a technique called perspectives in the upper rungs, which is changing your point of view, either projecting yourself into the future or into the past, but projecting into the future. So 1 year from today, where do you want to, date your page a year in advance, and then just go with a question. Where am I now?
Mm.
What have I done in the last year? How did this situation turn out? You know, um, or 30 days in the future. What do I want to get done this month? And that is a more practical application, but you can also use it to write in the voice of someone or something else. And so here's another way that you can engage the chakras. You could have your chakra write to you, or you can have a dialogue with it also in the upper rungs.
Yeah.
Or you can invite the chakra to speak through symbols or through metaphors. Um, Poetry is a wonderful, it's not on there's one poetic technique in the ladder, but you could, for people who are poetically inclined, you could write poems about your chakras, and that can be very, very revealing. Or
Yes.
you can have the chakras write poems about you
Yes.
or what you need. So there's a lot of ways that you can engage at levels that are appropriate for the learning and processing style of the client or the user. Um, People tend to find their place in the writing process when they have a lot of tools to choose from.
Yeah. I'm enjoying this so much. I feel like I'm getting so much. But my next question is, have you written a book? And if not, why not?
Yeah, I've written 14 books.
Okay. Fantastic. Fantastic. Great. So we can go. I feel like I need your book. That's why I'm asking. That's great.
Um, the book, my very first book, which is, the only one that has been a bestseller, um, was written almost 40 years. Well, it's been out since 1990. So what's that, 34 years in print? And they won't let me uh, reprint it because they say it's still selling well enough that there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I'm like, I have Doogie Howser references in this book. That was thank heavens, you know, uh,
Yes. For
Neil
those
Patrick,
30, 20
whatever
year
his
olds
name
and not.
is still relevant. I can't remember his name, but Harris, I think. Um, but it was very 90s. It was a very 90s book, and I
But
was
it's still
I
relevant
didn't
though.
know
I mean,
nearly as much as I know now. But Journal to the Self is my first book, and I have written lots of books since then.
Yeah.
Most recently, a duo set of books that are 365-day prompt books.
Oh, fabulous.
Um,
Yeah.
the first one is called Journal Therapy for Calming Anxiety, and the other one is Journal Therapy for Overcoming Burnout. And they were commissioned by a publisher that wanted a little tiny bit of theory and then a writing prompt
Mm,
underneath.
mm.
So um, those were fun.
Yeah, they sound really useful. So I have another a question for you, which is going to be slightly doolally. So one of the things that I like doing, especially when I'm out walking the dogs or I'm on the beach or whatever, I do a what I call a spoken journal. So I
Nice.
just have and sometimes I get my phone out and I get the microphone that will translate it into type for me, and I'll just speak into my phone so it's there, so I kind of know what I've said. But is that a valid way of journaling from the experts, world's expert? Tell me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's all kinds of ways to journal: writing, keyboarding, speaking, dancing can be, you
Yeah.
know, meditation. There's, yes, a spoken journal, especially if you are capturing it, but not even necessarily,
Mm,
can be um, a spontaneous download of whatever's on your mind, which is very similar to what you do when we're writing.
yeah.
And that's a completely valid way.
But it's a completely different way. There's no structure to that. It's more like free writing,
Yeah,
isn't it? Because
free,
I
free.
go down to the beach and I say to the sea, "Hi, sea, you're big and bad and strong enough to take my stuff. So here we go, ready." Off I go and download
Uh-huh.
everything that I want, give it to the sea. But it's more just like free flowing, just thoughts. But it is fascinating what comes up. If you're a reluctant
Mhm.
writer, if because I'll be honest with you, okay? So this is the thing. I have an app on my laptop so I can type into my journal as well. But I know that picking up a pen and a piece of paper is the way to go. But in all honesty, the amount I have to say sometimes, my hand gives out before my brain gives out. So it's
Mhm.
really comforting to hear that typing and speaking is actually just as valid. And I suppose that you could apply your techniques and the various kind of structures around uh, in those ways as well. So, through
Yeah,
typing,
totally,
speaking, yeah, it's really,
totally valid. And
mm,
maybe what you would do after you've done a recorded download to the sea is when you get home, maybe just write for 5 or 7 minutes about, what happened. I
mm,
I spoke to the sea this morning and gave it all my stuff, and now I feel,
yeah,
however,
dot, dot,
and
dot.
I mean, you can capture something that is a non-traditional way of journaling by bringing in a short write that helps you synthesize. One of the really great things about writing, whether it's by hand or by keyboard, is that the synthesizing effect. And I too am biased toward, in my own personal life, I biased toward writing by hand because that's how I get my best results. But I did a research study in 2015 with a friend of mine who um, did a 30-day digital journaling challenge. And he had this gigantic audience. Um, and he had something like 4,000 people sign up for this event. And 35% of them, I think 35% of them were men, which is
Mhm.
like, we do not have enough men represented in this field.
Yeah.
It's like men will
That's
self-select. I mean, if you have any gathering of journal writers, if you have 10 or 12% of men as the population, that's huge.
mm,
There's just not that much. So I said, let's do a study and see if there's any difference between writing by hand and writing on a device. And there
yeah.
isn't. In the follow-up studies, we asked questions like, you know, um, when you're writing, things like ease of writing, speed of writing, solving problems. I feel healthier when I do this. I feel more integrated. I feel like I can handle my relationships better. We asked just like a load of questions. And then we said by hand, by journal, by digital, by
Mm,
keyboarding,
yeah.
no difference, no discernible difference between men and women and between typing and writing by hand.
Well,
It
that's
doesn't matter. You get the same outcomes. The big difference was, well, two big differences. One was the um, women, on average, had, well, the vast majority of women, something like 85% of women, had started writing a journal by the time they were out of college, either as a child, as a teenager, as a college student, whatever. By the time they got out of college, 85% of the women had started writing. The men, about 50, no, more than that. Most of the men had started writing in the last 2 years, and a lot more men than women had started writing with this 30-day digital journaling challenge. I don't remember the statistics. This was 10 years ago.
yeah.
So the fact that men had so much less experience with journaling was significant,
Yeah.
but they got the same outcomes. And the other thing was that when we asked the question, how comfortable are you writing by hand and how comfortable are you writing on a device, men and women were approximately equally comfortable writing on a device. Women were 20% more comfortable than men writing by hand.
Mm.
Well, not 20%. They were 20 points higher.
Yeah.
Almost everybody, but
Yeah,
so
I knew
that,
you were going to say that. So right, that's a really fascinating thing. But I think that's because as a child, as a teenager, if we're talking, depends how old you are, but if they're my age, when you're a teenager, you didn't have a device, they didn't exist, you
yeah, exactly.
you
Yeah,
had no option but to write in a book with a pen. And so it's that sort of habit forming thing. Whereas now, if someone was to say, start saying journaling, it is it, I'm just so heartened to hear that keyboard writing is the same because I had that little doubt, that little kind of, oh, I'm getting it, getting a bit wrong in my own head. And I'm so comforted to hear that
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not.
yeah.
It's,
Another reason I did a study of men and journaling in the 90s, and it resulted in a book that went out of print almost immediately because it just like tanked. Um, but it was a great project. It was called Mightier Than the Sword. The journal is a path toward men's self-discovery, and I interviewed and worked with and taught like 300 men in the course of the study. Um, which is where I first learned that there's no significant difference between men and women in what they write and how they write. They just need permission to get started and to write on a device if they wanted to.
mm.
But one of the reasons, I mean, I asked questions like, what stops you? And one of the biggest things that stops men from writing by hand is they have been shamed by their own handwriting.
Oh gosh, yes. Wow. So even in the process, they're denigrating themselves because they're looking at their handwriting, go, what spider wrote that? Yes.
Yeah, one guy said his fiance, they were he was so excited because they were addressing their wedding invitations, and she said, you can't do this anymore because your handwriting is illegible.
Oh, strange, isn't it? I mean, I suppose it's one of those things that girls sort of, creative, slightly more advanced during those periods of that, when you're writing at school, girls are just that little bit more apply themselves and a bit more advanced. It's been studies have shown that. So, yeah. Isn't what a shame? Well, I mean, it's obviously seems to be like a really important thing to get more men journaling. And the rise of having a journaling app. I'm just trying to remember what the app on my laptop that I've got is called, that my journaling app. Where is it? Um, it's called Reflection. There we go. It's called
Mhm.
Reflection. It's a very nice little app and it's very user friendly. So if anybody wants an app, a journaling app, that's the one I use, called Reflection.
Mhm.
Got it on my Apple. So yeah, it's all good. Listen, Kay, I could talk to you forever, but we've been on the call for nearly an hour and I can't keep you any longer. So thank you. First of all, really
Oh,
thank you. This has been so fascinating. But tell people how they can get hold of you, where they can find you, where they can get, I mean, obviously you just look up Kathleen Adams on Amazon or wherever and you're going to find books, multiple. But where can they find you otherwise?
our website is journaltherapy.com, just like it sounds,
Mhm.
Journal therapy.com. Um, and that is kind of home base. That's where we have a lot of stuff. There's some free resources there you can download. Uh, we also have an online school for people who really, really want to deep dive to become facilitators of this work. It's called the Therapeutic Writing Institute, and you can get there from journaltherapy.com. It has its own website, but it's linked there. Um, and I have a newsletter that I send out kind of irregularly, but we have interesting things going on all the time. Um, and my email address is kay@journaltherapy.com if anybody wants to reach out. We also have a storefront on Amazon, and that URL is it's a bit.ly link, so bit.ly/CJT for Center for Journal Therapy store, CJT
Okay.
store.
People will find
So
you. The founder of, yeah, the Center for Journal Therapy. I mean, that's where you're going to find Kay, and am I feel really enthused to continue on my journaling journey, and I will recommend it even more heartily to my clients, because this scientific background is just it's fantastic. You've given me so much good stuff. I'm so grateful to you, Kay. Thank you.
you're more than welcome. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.